The first time my son asked me about the $5,000, I was standing in my kitchen on Mother's Day, holding a cake he had brought me from the most expensive bakery in town. He smiled as he placed it on the counter. Then his smile disappeared. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you like the $5,000 that stranger sends you every month?" The cake nearly slipped from my hands. I stared at him. "What stranger?" My son Daniel pulled out his phone. He turned the screen toward me. There were 12 deposits, one every month, exactly $5,000, and beneath them was a name I had spent 38 years trying to forget. Michael Bennett. I felt the room become strangely quiet. Daniel looked at me. "Who is Michael Bennett?" I couldn't answer. Because Michael Bennett wasn't a stranger. He was the man who had once promised my husband he would destroy our family, and somehow after all these years he had been sending me money, every single month. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Daniel had found out about the payments on the same day. I had planned to tell him the biggest secret of his life, a secret I had buried for nearly 4 decades, and once I finally told him the truth, my millionaire son would discover that the fortune he thought belonged to him had never really belonged to his father. It had belonged to me. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 63 years old, and for most of my life, I learned how to survive without asking anyone for help. I married Daniel's father, Richard, when I was 24. Richard came from a wealthy family. I didn't. His father owned a construction company that had grown into a multi-million-dollar business. By the time Richard and I married, everyone expected him to take over the company. I never cared about the money. I loved Richard. At least I thought I did. We had Daniel 2 years after our wedding. He was the center of my world. For a while, our life was perfect. Then Richard changed. He became obsessed with business. He started coming home late. He stopped talking to me. And eventually, he started making decisions that affected our entire family without telling me. One evening, when Daniel was only 7, I found a document in Richard's study. It was a property agreement. My name was on it. But the signature wasn't mine. Someone had forged my signature. I confronted Richard. He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked me directly in the eyes and said something I would never forget. "You wouldn't understand the business, Margaret." I asked him why my name was on the document. He said it was complicated. Then he told me to trust him. I did. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was believing that the worst thing a husband could do was lie to his wife. I was wrong. 3 years later, Richard died unexpectedly. Daniel was 10. I remember standing beside the hospital bed, holding my son's hand while doctors moved around us. Richard's family arrived within minutes. His father, his lawyers, and before Richard's funeral was even over, they started talking about the company. I thought they were grieving. I was wrong again. 3 days after the funeral, Richard's father called me into his office. He placed a folder on the desk. "Richard left instructions," he said. My heart stopped. "What instructions?" He slid the folder toward me. According to the documents, Richard had left almost everything to his family business. I was supposed to receive a small monthly allowance. Daniel would receive money through a trust when he turned 25. I stared at the papers. But Richard promised me the house. His father didn't even look up. Promises aren't legal documents. I felt something break inside me. Then he said something even worse. "Sign this, Margaret. Take the allowance and raise your son quietly." I refused. That night, someone broke into our house. Nothing valuable was stolen. Only one thing was missing: a small black box from Richard's study. I knew exactly what had been inside it: a key, and a handwritten note Richard had once given me. I had hidden the note because I was afraid. Now it was gone. For years, I believed that was the end of the story. I raised Daniel alone. I worked 2 jobs. I sold my jewelry. I gave up everything I had. Daniel grew up believing his father had left us very little. But I never told him the whole truth. I didn't want him to grow up hating his father's family, so I stayed silent. Daniel became successful. Very successful. By 35, he had built a technology company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He bought me a beautiful house. He hired people to take care of the yard. He kept telling me I didn't need to work anymore, but I always refused. I told him I liked my independence. What I never told him was that I had another reason. For 17 years, someone had been sending me $5,000 every month. The first payment arrived on the morning of my 46th birthday. There was no letter. No explanation. Only a bank transfer. $5,000. Sender: Michael Bennett. I recognized the name immediately. Michael had been Richard's closest business partner. And according to Richard, the one man who knew where every secret was buried. I didn't touch the money. I went to the bank and asked them to reverse the transfer. The banker told me it had already been authorized through a legal trust. I asked who created it. He couldn't tell me. 2 days later, another payment arrived. Another $5,000. Then another. Every month, for 17 years. I used almost none of it. Instead, I placed it into a separate account, because I knew one day Michael would come back. I just didn't know why. That Mother's Day morning, Daniel arrived unexpectedly. He hugged me. He brought flowers. He brought the cake. For a few minutes, I felt like the happiest mother alive. Then he showed me his phone. "Mom, I wasn't trying to invade your privacy," he said. My accountant noticed these payments while reviewing some old family financial records. I sat down. "What records?" "Dad's old estate files." My stomach tightened. Daniel stared at me. "Why is Michael Bennett sending you $5,000 every month?" I looked toward the window. I knew the day had finally come. "Daniel." "Mom, please." His voice wasn't angry. It was hurt. "You've always told me there were no secrets between us." I closed my eyes. I lied. He went completely still. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. I reached into the cabinet. Behind an old tea set was a small envelope. I had kept it there for 17 years. I placed it on the table. Daniel looked at it. "What is that?" "Your father gave it to me 2 weeks before he died." Daniel slowly opened it. Inside was a single sentence written in Richard's handwriting. "If Michael ever pays Margaret, it means the truth is finally safe to tell." Daniel looked at me. "What truth?" I whispered. "Your father didn't leave us broke." Daniel's face changed. "What?" "He left you something worth more than the company." "What did he leave me?" I shook my head. "Not you." Daniel frowned. "Then who?" "Me." Daniel stood up. He walked across the kitchen, then back again. "So you're telling me Dad left you an inheritance?" "Yes." "Why didn't you take it?" "I tried." "And?" "They took it." "Who?" "Your grandfather, your uncle, and Michael." Daniel stared at me. "Michael was involved?" "Yes." "But he's been paying you for 17 years. "I know." "Why?" I didn't know. Daniel looked confused. "Mom, this doesn't make sense." It didn't make sense to me either. I reached into the envelope and pulled out another document. "This is the reason." Daniel unfolded it. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. "This is a trust agreement." "Yes." "What's this company?" I looked at him. "It's called Bennett Holdings." Daniel's expression changed. "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because Bennett Holdings was acquired by my father's company 39 years ago." I nodded. "No." Daniel shook his head. "That company was worth hundreds of millions." "It is." He stared at me. "Mom, what are you saying?" I took a deep breath. "Your father didn't acquire Bennett Holdings." Daniel looked at me. "Bennett Holdings acquired your father's company." Silence. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Daniel whispered, "Who owned Bennett Holdings?" I looked directly into my son's eyes. "Michael Bennett's father." Daniel sat down. "So Dad stole the company?" "No." "Then what happened?" "Your grandfather stole it from Michael's family." Daniel covered his face with his hands. "And Dad?" "Your father discovered the truth." I told Daniel everything. 39 years earlier, Richard had discovered that his father had manipulated a series of property transfers. The Bennett family had legally owned several valuable properties. Richard's father wanted control, so he created false agreements. He pressured Michael's father into signing documents he didn't fully understand. Then he used Richard's position in the company to hide the transactions. Richard eventually found out. He wanted to expose his father. But his father threatened him. He told Richard that if he went to the authorities, Daniel and I would lose everything. Richard backed down. But before he died, he secretly created a legal trust. A trust that transferred the disputed assets to me. Not Richard. Not Daniel. Me, because Richard believed his family would try to manipulate Daniel after his death. He was right. The trust had one condition. I had to remain silent until Michael Bennett confirmed that the original documents had been recovered. That's why Michael paid me. The money wasn't charity. It was proof. Every payment was confirmation that the trust was still active. Daniel stared at me. "So why didn't Michael just tell you everything?" "He was afraid." "Of what?" Your grandfather. But Grandpa's dead. He wasn't 17 years ago. Daniel slowly understood. And now? Now Michael believes it's safe. That evening, the doorbell rang. Daniel and I looked at each other. I already knew who it was. When I opened the door, an older man stood outside. Gray hair, dark coat, a leather folder under one arm. Michael Bennett. He looked at me, then at Daniel. I'm sorry, he said. Daniel stepped forward. You've been paying my mother for 17 years. Michael nodded. Yes. Why? Michael looked at me. Because your father asked me to. Daniel's jaw tightened. What exactly did he ask you to do? Michael entered the house. He placed the leather folder on the table. I was supposed to protect your mother until the truth could be revealed. He opened the folder. Inside were original contracts, property records, bank statements, and photographs. Daniel looked through them. His expression became more serious with every page. Then he found one photograph. It showed Richard standing beside Michael's father. Behind them was an old building. Daniel recognized it. That's the headquarters of my company. Michael nodded. It belonged to my family. Daniel looked at him. So my company was built on stolen property? Partly. Daniel's face went pale. What about my father's fortune? Michael looked at me. Then at Daniel. Your father spent years trying to correct his father's mistakes. Daniel looked confused. He didn't leave you nothing, Michael said. He left you the chance to make things right. The next morning, Michael took us to an old storage facility outside the city. Inside was a metal box. He handed me a key. The same kind of key Richard had given me decades earlier. My hands trembled. I inserted it. The box opened. Inside was a stack of documents. At the very top was a letter. My name was written on it. I knew Richard's handwriting immediately. I opened it. And for the first time in 38 years, I heard my husband's voice again. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote that he had been weak. He wrote that he had allowed his father's ambition to destroy the people he loved. But the last paragraph changed everything. He wrote, Margaret, if Daniel ever becomes successful, don't let him believe success gives him the right to keep what isn't his. Teach him that a fortune is worthless if it costs him his integrity. I couldn't stop crying. Daniel read the letter after me. He stood silently for a long time. Then he said, I thought you were hiding money from me. I smiled through my tears. I was hiding the truth. He looked at me. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you were my son before you were a businessman. Daniel hugged me, and I realized that all those years of silence had finally ended. But there was one more surprise. Michael hadn't brought us there just to reveal the past. He had brought us there because the trust was finally ready to be executed. The assets that had been hidden for decades were worth more than anyone had realized. Several properties had increased dramatically in value. Together, they were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Daniel looked at the documents. So this belongs to Mom? Michael nodded. Legally. Daniel turned toward me. Then take it. I laughed softly. I don't need hundreds of millions. You deserve it. I already have everything I wanted. What? I looked at him. You. Daniel smiled. Then he did something I never expected. He asked Michael to help him create a foundation. A foundation using the money recovered from the old estate. He wanted to compensate the Bennett family. He wanted to restore properties that had been taken unfairly. And he wanted to create scholarships for children who had grown up believing they had no chance simply because they were born into the wrong family. Michael agreed. But there was still one final question. What about the people who stole it? Daniel asked. I knew exactly who he meant. His uncle. The people who had helped hide the documents. The lawyers who had participated. Daniel wanted justice, not revenge. So we took everything to the authorities and allowed the evidence to speak for itself. Some people lost businesses. Some faced financial penalties. Some were forced to return assets. But nobody was harmed. For the first time, I understood the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge wants someone to suffer. Justice simply wants the truth to stop being buried. A year later, on Mother's Day, Daniel came to my house again. He brought another cake. I laughed when I saw it. Please tell me you didn't pay $500 for that. He smiled. No. Good. He put it on the table. Then he handed me a small envelope. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. It showed Daniel, Michael, and me standing in front of the restored Bennett family building. On the back, Daniel had written, Mom, You taught me that the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's knowing who you are when money can't buy your way out. I looked at him. You know, I said, I still don't understand why Michael sent exactly $5,000. Daniel laughed. Michael had never explained that part. So we called him. He answered immediately. Daniel put him on speaker. Michael, I said, why $5,000? There was a pause. Then Michael laughed. Because your husband told me that was the amount you would accept without feeling like someone was trying to buy your silence. I smiled. That sounds like Richard. Michael replied. He also told me something else. What? He said, if she ever asks for more, give her everything. Daniel looked at me. I looked at him. And suddenly, all those monthly payments made sense. They weren't payments for my silence. They were reminders. Reminders that somewhere in the world, someone remembered what had really happened. Someone believed I deserved the truth. Someone was waiting for the right moment to bring it home. I spent nearly 40 years believing that my husband's greatest mistake had destroyed our family. But I was wrong. His greatest mistake had been believing his family could control the truth forever, because eventually secrets become too heavy to carry. Eventually documents surface. Eventually someone asks the right question. And sometimes it happens on an ordinary Mother's Day, with a cake on the kitchen counter, a son standing across from his mother, and one simple question. Mom, why has a stranger been sending you $5,000? That question changed everything. But the truth behind those payments changed even more. Because my son didn't inherit his father's fortune that day. He inherited something much more valuable. The courage to do what his father couldn't. Make things right. And as I watched Daniel walk away that evening, I realized something I should have understood decades earlier. A family isn't measured by how much money it leaves behind. It's measured by what it is willing to give back. And after 38 years of silence, our family finally gave back what never belonged to us. The money was gone. The secrets were gone. The fear was gone. But for the first time in my life, I was free. The next morning, Daniel called me before breakfast. Mom, I need you to come to my office. His voice sounded different. What happened? I found something in Dad's old estate records. When I arrived, Daniel was standing beside a table covered with papers. Michael Bennett was there too. Daniel picked up an old photograph. Mom, do you recognize this man? I looked at it. My heart stopped. It was Richard's old business partner, Michael Bennett. But that wasn't what frightened me. On the back of the photograph, Richard had written, If Margaret ever receives money from Michael, the truth is finally ready to come out. Daniel looked at me. You knew about this? I shook my head. No, but I knew Michael was connected to your father's final days. Your father discovered something before he died. What? Daniel asked. Michael looked at me first. Then he said, An inheritance. Daniel frowned. I thought Dad left everything to his family. He didn't. Michael placed an old document on the table. Your father created a private trust, but someone changed the records after his death. I stared at the document. My name was on it. Daniel looked shocked. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Because I never knew. Michael leaned forward. And there's something even more important. What? The $5,000 wasn't a gift. He paused. It was a payment from that hidden trust. Daniel stared at him. Then who changed the trust? Michael looked toward the window. That's what your father spent the last weeks of his life trying to discover. And suddenly, the money wasn't the mystery anymore. The real mystery was who had stolen my inheritance, and why. Richard had died before he could expose them. Daniel picked up the document again. Mom, look at this. I moved closer. At the bottom of the page was a name I hadn't seen in decades. Henry Collins, Richard's younger brother. My hands went cold. Henry? I whispered. Daniel looked at Michael. Why would Uncle Henry be connected to Dad's trust? Michael didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, Because Henry was the last person who spoke to your father before he died. I stared at him. That isn't possible. I saw him that night, Michael said. Richard called me afterward. What did he say? Michael lowered his voice. He told me someone in the family had betrayed him. Daniel's expression hardened. Who? Michael pointed to the document. Your uncle. My heart refused to believe it. Henry had been the one who helped me after Richard's funeral. He brought groceries, paid bills, and repeatedly told me that Richard's family would always protect us. Could all of it have been a lie? Daniel turned another page. Then he suddenly stopped. Mom. What? There are monthly payments listed here. He showed me the page. Each payment was exactly $5,000. The first date was only 2 months after Richard died. And beside the first payment was Henry's name. I felt dizzy. That's impossible. Michael shook his head. No. It means Henry received the first payments before they ever reached you. Daniel stared at the document. Why would he receive Mom's money? Before Michael could answer, Daniel's phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. Nobody spoke. Then a man's voice whispered, Stop looking into your father's inheritance. The call ended. Daniel slowly lowered the phone. I looked at him. Who was it? He stared at the document. I don't know. Then another message appeared on his phone. Ask your mother what happened the night your father died. I couldn't breathe, because there was one thing I had never told my son. Henry was at our house that night. Daniel stared at me. Mom, Henry was at our house the night Dad died? I couldn't answer. For 38 years, I had carried that memory alone. Finally, I nodded. Yes. Daniel pulled out a chair. Tell me everything. I sat down. It was late. Your father had been working in his study. Henry arrived around 11. Were they arguing? Yes. About the trust? I didn't know what they were discussing then. But I remember your father saying, You promised me you would stay out of this. Daniel looked at me. And what did Henry say? I closed my eyes. He told your father that some things were bigger than our family. Michael suddenly stood. Margaret, did Richard leave with Henry? Yes. Did he say where they were going? I shook my head. He only told me, Take care of Daniel. I'll be back soon. My voice broke. He never came back. Daniel looked down. And the next morning, the police came. Who called them? I froze. I don't know. Michael exchanged a glance with Daniel. Then he asked, Was Henry still there? No, he had left. Daniel stood. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me this? Because I was scared. Your father was dead, you were only 10, and everyone kept telling me it had been an accident. What accident? A car crash. Daniel's face changed. But Dad wasn't driving. I looked at him. What? My company has the old insurance records. Dad's car was found abandoned near the highway. Michael stepped closer. That's not what the official report says. Daniel shook his head. I saw the file last year. The driver was never identified. Silence filled the room. Then Daniel opened the old document again. There is another name here. He pointed to a handwritten note beneath Henry's name. Thomas Reed. Michael went pale. That's impossible. Why? Because Thomas died shortly after Richard. Daniel looked at him. Are you sure? Michael nodded. I attended his funeral. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. Another message. This time there was a photograph. It showed an older man standing outside a small house. Underneath it were 5 words. He never died. Find him. Daniel looked at Michael. Do you recognize him? Michael stared at the photograph. His face lost all color. Yes. Who is he? Michael whispered. Thomas Reed. I looked at the photograph. The man who supposedly died 38 years ago was alive, and somehow he knew exactly what had happened to my husband. Daniel grabbed his coat. Then we're going to find him. But before we could leave, another message appeared. If you find Thomas, ask him where Richard hid the original inheritance document. I stared at the screen. The mystery had just become bigger. Because if Thomas was alive, then someone had spent 38 years making sure we believed he was dead. We found Thomas Reed the following afternoon. He was living quietly in a small town 3 hours away, under a different name. When he opened the door and saw Michael, his face immediately changed. Michael? Michael stared at him. We thought you were dead. Thomas gave a tired smile. That was the idea. Daniel stepped forward. Did you know my father? Thomas nodded. I knew Richard very well. Then tell me what happened the night he died. Thomas looked at me. I've been waiting 38 years to tell you. My heart began pounding. He invited us inside. On the table was an old leather folder. Thomas opened it. Inside were copies of bank records, property documents, and letters written by Richard. Your father discovered that his family had been hiding money for years, Thomas said. Daniel frowned. How much? Millions. And the trust? Thomas looked at me. That was the part they feared most. He explained that Richard's mother had secretly created a trust in my name. It contained properties that had never legally belonged to Richard's father, but after Richard's death, someone forged documents to make it appear that I had surrendered my rights. Daniel looked at me. That's why you never received the inheritance. I nodded slowly. Thomas continued. Richard knew they would try to take everything from you. Who? Henry? My heart sank. Your uncle wasn't working alone, Thomas said. He was helping Richard's father hide the trust. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then why did Henry send Mom money? Thomas looked at him. Because those payments were never meant to be his. He pulled out an old bank statement. The first $5,000 payment went through Henry's account. He was supposed to transfer it to your mother. Daniel stared at the page. But he kept some of it. Thomas nodded. For years. Michael looked angry. Why didn't you expose him? Thomas lowered his eyes. Because Richard made me promise to disappear. Why? Because he knew his father would come after anyone who had the original evidence. I asked quietly. Where is that evidence now? Thomas looked at me. Your husband hid it somewhere only you would recognize. Daniel leaned forward. Where? Thomas smiled sadly. He left one clue. He opened Richard's final letter. At the bottom was a single sentence. Look where I made you my first promise. I immediately remembered our first date. The little diner where Richard had promised he would never let money change him. Daniel looked at me. You know where it is. I nodded. But before we could leave, Thomas stopped us. There is one problem. What? Henry knows you're looking. Daniel froze. Thomas continued. And if he finds that document first... He paused. You may lose everything again. We reached the old diner just before sunset. I hadn't been there in almost 40 years. The tables were different. The walls had been repainted. But the small corner, booth where Richard and I had once dreamed about our future was still there. I ran my fingers beneath the wooden table. Then I felt it. A loose panel. Daniel, I whispered. He crouched beside me and pulled it open. Inside was a small metal box. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. There was only one key. Daniel opened the box. Inside was the original trust agreement, several property records, and one final letter from Richard. I unfolded it. Margaret, if you are reading this, then the truth survived. My eyes filled with tears. Richard explained everything. His father had discovered the trust and tried to take control of it. Henry had helped him because he was afraid of losing his place in the family business. But Richard had secretly protected the original documents. He also revealed the truth about the $5,000 payments. They were never meant to make me rich. They were meant to keep the trust active until Daniel was old enough to understand what had happened. Then I reached the final paragraph. Margaret, I am sorry I couldn't protect you myself. But please don't spend your life seeking revenge. Take what is legally yours, and then use it to build the life I wanted for you and Daniel. I couldn't stop crying. Daniel put his arm around me. He loved you. I nodded. I know. But there was one final surprise. At the bottom of the letter was another name, Thomas Reed. Beside it was an address. Daniel looked at me. We already found Thomas. I shook my head. No. I pointed to the address. This is a different place. We called Thomas immediately. When he arrived, he stared at the address. Then he smiled sadly. That was Richard's second hiding place. Inside that property, we found the remaining financial records. They proved that several properties had been transferred illegally decades earlier. The evidence was undeniable. For the first time, the truth could no longer be buried. Henry eventually admitted his involvement. He confessed that he had accepted money from the trust and helped Richard's father conceal the original documents, but he also admitted something else. He had never wanted Richard dead. He had been afraid. He believed his father would destroy the entire family if Richard exposed him. That didn't excuse what he had done, but it explained why he had spent years carrying the guilt. The legal case took months. In the end, the original trust was recognized. The properties and assets connected to it were returned to me. The total value was nearly $286 million. Daniel could have fought to keep the money inside his company. Instead, he stood beside me and said, Mom, this was stolen from you. It belongs to you. I looked at my son. For 38 years, I had believed I had failed to give him a wealthy life. But standing there, I realized I had given him something far more important. A conscience. We used much of the inheritance to help families who had been cheated out of their property. Daniel created a foundation in his father's name, Thomas became an advisor. Michael helped manage the trust. And Henry gave back everything he had kept. It didn't erase the past. Nothing could. But it finally gave the past a proper ending. The following Mother's Day, Daniel came to my house with a small cake. Nothing expensive, just a simple homemade cake with too much frosting. I laughed when I saw it. "Is this supposed to be my Mother's Day gift?" He smiled. "No." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a bank statement, a $5,000 transfer. I looked at him. "You're sending me money now?" He laughed. "No, I just wanted you to see something." At the bottom of the statement was a note. "For everything you sacrificed before I understood what sacrifice meant." My eyes filled with tears. Daniel hugged me. Then he whispered, "Mom, I finally understand why you kept those payments secret." I smiled. "They weren't really about money." "I know." He held me tighter. "They were a promise." I looked toward the window. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about Richard's death. I was thinking about his final gift. Not the $286 million, not the properties, not the trust. His greatest gift had been Daniel, a son who had been given every reason to choose greed and chose integrity instead. That Mother's Day, I finally understood the truth behind the $5,000. It wasn't payment for my silence. It wasn't charity. It wasn't even really an inheritance. It was a reminder that somewhere, someone had remembered what had been taken from me. And when my millionaire son finally asked, "Mom, why has a stranger been sending you $5,000? I thought he was asking about money. He was actually asking me to tell him the truth. And once the truth came out, we discovered something far more valuable than the fortune everyone had been fighting over. We discovered who our family really was. And after 38 years, I finally stopped looking backward because I had my son beside me. I had the truth in my hands. And for the first time in my life, I had nothing left to hide.